Oh my goodness, the stock market is in complete free fall because of Donald Trump's tariffs, okay? However, before you panic and sell everything you own, just breathe and take a step back and notice that yes, from the max, we are down about 4,000 points on the Dow, okay? And things that go up have to come down eventually. There's not going to be a constant rise. And as you can see, yes, over history, there have been several dips that we've been able to recover from. However, why is this one so bad? Well, today it was compounded because China announced that they're doing a 34% retaliatory tariff on Donald Trump's 34% tariffs. And over here you can see, yes, Donald Trump released a chart according to the trade discrepancy between countries. And China is first on the list with a 67% tariff on U.S. products and goods. And of course, the U.S. comes back with the 34% tariff. So now China has stacked another 34% on top of that. So now they're effectively at 101% tariffs on American goods. Now that doesn't sound great, but we have to understand that this has been going on for years, if not decades, where other countries have high tariffs on all of our goods, and yet they expect us to accept everything in with no cost added. And the end result of this mentality is that all of our manufacturing is being shipped off overseas, and then we're forced to buy back the goods that we could have produced here, okay? But this is what we're going to see explained to Kaitlan Collins over on CNN in tremendous fashion. But before we get to these clips, don't forget to like and comment on this video so we can break through the algorithms. Here we go.
The consumer who's watching that, who's worried that they're going to have to pay more for their car tonight.
Well, actually, March had a record car sales in the month of March. Sales are booming. I think there's a lot of inventory, probably 60, 90 days worth of inventory. So if somebody's really concerned, they can go buy a car today at dealer inventory and not have to worry about the tariff at all. But ultimately, what we're looking to do is very simple. We need cars made here in America that are sold here in America. It's extremely important that happens to rebuild our middle class, rebuild our industrial sector, rebuild cities like the ones I represent in Ohio. And of course, eventually you need customers. And if we keep gutting out our middle class, who are we going to sell these cars to? Henry Ford taught us that. Pay your workers well, and they can buy the very products that they make.
One question, if there is, inventory at these dealerships, because certainly they have been stocking up in anticipation of this, especially with the 1 month delay that President Trump gave them. What happens? How quickly can this turn around for production inside the United States? Because obviously a lot of the cars, even ones made here, have parts that come from other places.
Well, remember, the cars that are made final assembly in the U.S. and get parts from Mexico and Canada, those cars, if they're USMCA compliant, they don't get any tariffs, so they're completely tariff-free. So that's a big population of vehicles. The only ones that are mostly hurt are the cars that are made overseas exclusively and are shipped into the United States. The ultra luxury cars, I think the Democrats should rally around this tariff, because let's face it, if you're tariffing a guy who buys a Bugatti for $4 million, it's a tax on the very, very wealthy. You'd think Chuck Schumer should be applauding that, right?
What about a Mercedes dealership in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, though? Yeah,
well, Mercedes makes a lot of cars in Alabama, a huge chunk of them, actually exports some, by the way. And I think those cars will only have tariffs as much as the engines, transmissions, and electronics that come from Europe. If the other parts come from the U.S. or Mexico or Canada, there's no tariff.
We'll see what it looks. The former vice president disagrees. You were in the Rose Garden today with Vice President Vance, but Vice President Pence tweeted that the Trump tariff tax, he says, is the largest peacetime tax hike in the United States history. He says that they're nearly 10 times what they imposed during the first term, the Trump-Pence administration, as he noted. And he says they're going to cost American families over $3,500 per year. If President Trump and Vice President Vance were hired by the American people to lower cost, what happens if their policies raise them?
Well, again, they were hired to make it so that your wages outstripped inflation. So if inflation is at 2%, and wages are up by 6%, they feel better about what they're doing. And look, no offense to Mike Pence, he's never run anything other than a political campaign. This is not a business guy. So he's repeating talking points. He was the
vice president.
Yeah, but he never ran a business. So he has no idea what any of this is about. He's never been in the private sector. These career politicians are part of the problem here in D.C. because they actually don't know what it's like to actually understand how businesses work. And what President Trump is doing is reversing the policies of people like Mike Pence, who sold this country out, that over decades gutted our industrial sector, shipped our jobs overseas. Cities like Cleveland, Columbus, Dayton, Toledo, Youngstown. These were thriving cities that produced a lot of goods. Look,
Why do you hold Pence responsible for that, though?
because he's just that group of politicians that were both Republicans and Democrats. It's not, again, him personally. It's just that group of politicians. A lot of the ones that I watched give speeches today on the Senate floor, they've been there for 20, 30 years while this country's been taken advantage of by foreign countries. Did nothing about it.
That is exactly it. There are so many members of Congress who've never ran a business, who never had to sign checks. And Donald Trump comes in and says, look at all these different trade practices that are really detrimental to businesses here in America. And how does he know that? Because he's done business around the world, okay? And all of these politicians, Republicans and Democrats, for decades have been basically selling out America to foreign countries, right? All of our manufacturing, all of these jobs shipped overseas, where of course they can produce things on slave labor wages and then sell them back into America at basically zero tariffs because we believe in free trade here in this country. But is it really free trade if all of the other countries are allowed to have their exorbitant tariffs and we're not? No, obviously this is a huge detriment to the American worker and the middle class who simply want to buy quality goods at a reasonable price and hopefully have a decent wage so they're able to afford it, right? So while these tariffs may actually produce a little bit of pain in the short term, in the long run, people will have better, high-paying, quality jobs and goods that are produced here in America, not made by our enemies and sold back to us. But there's also a big added benefit that Democrats should be looking forward to, as is pointed out here by Scott Jennings.
I have mixed feelings about this, truthfully. I wasn't trained to believe in tariffs. You know, those of us who grew up as traditional Republicans have always thought what Ronald Reagan thought. And so what Trump is doing here is implanting new economic theory DNA inside of the Republican Party. And what you're seeing is some Republicans are rejecting it. Some Republicans are reluctantly going on with it. Some Republicans are enthusiastically embracing it. I know people in the business community who are on both sides of it, frankly, back home in Kentucky and elsewhere. I'm also persuaded, frankly, by the Trump argument regarding the working class in this country and also by the fairness argument. So I will just say this. If it works, it'll be the ballsiest and gutsiest thing a president's done in decades. Let me finish.
No, please, ma'am,
let me finish. And if it doesn't work, the political consequences fall on the shoulders of one man.
Actually, and I totally agree with you. This is the one time I actually agree with you. Jim Cramer said it best. Well, there are several, maybe 5 times. This is one of those 5 times. Jim Cramer said, this is a man-made issue. One man made this issue, and it was Donald Trump. And I think that the Americans wanted lower prices. They didn't want higher prices. What's going to happen, and what economists are saying, is not only are people going to get laid off, but costs are going to go up. And that's not what the American people want. And they're going to see it in the midterm elections. And so I think that the Republican Party needs to be very careful about what they're doing. The other problem with all of this is the uncertainty. He's not saying how long these tariffs are going to go. He's not saying, is this a done deal for a while, or is it a short-term deal? And that's a problem.
Let me let Richard in. You talked about the political consequences will be on the shoulders of one man, but the economic consequences are going to be on the whole world. This is an experiment that should not have been taking place because, and you talk about the Republicans who are not speaking up. So far, I mean, Mitch McConnell has come out with a statement. Where was he talking about this, by the way, during the campaign when we knew that tariffs were going to be large on the agenda? You also said...
You just raised an issue. You said during the campaign, when we knew, because Donald Trump...
No one ever expected this madness.
They expected Donald Trump to enact tariffs. He did it in his first term.
Let's be clear.
This is economic vandalism.
I mean, this is actually not.
Well, I would think a lot of working class Americans would say what was done to them was economic carnage.
Yes, economic carnage indeed. We have watched the middle class of America get hollowed out over the last several decades due to bad trade practices. All right. And I like how Scott Jennings actually mentions that, yes, Republicans historically have been against tariffs because obviously when you put a tariff on something, it raises the price. However, what Donald Trump saw that the rest of us apparently didn't is that in his first term, if you actually enact a tariff, it can have the opposite effect of generating revenue and forcing industry back into this country. And that, of course, is when my eyes were open because I sat there back in 2018 thinking to myself, this doesn't sound like a good idea. And then all of a sudden, what happened? We had a few weeks of down days in the market, but then everything started to boom again because people saw that you can actually collect money from foreign entities who are also our adversaries, and everything will be fine. No matter how many retaliatory tariffs all these other countries try to put on us, we are still the envy of the world in terms of our markets, right? We have the biggest consumer base out there with the most disposable income. So everyone wants a piece of this pie, which is why they've been doing what they've been doing over the last several years. And also the Democrats, who supposedly care about the average normal working person, should be very excited about this, because if it actually works, then that means that their lives will be better off. But if it fails, that means Donald Trump is going to look real bad, right? So either way, the Democrats should be rooting for this to happen. But of course, we don't want to put it past them, because they're famous on record as saying, we hope the markets crash because we don't want Donald Trump to be elected or reelected. Is that third term coming? I don't think it is. But thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to like, share, comment, subscribe, and say hi to your mom for me.